Les Miles says a lot of things that are less than smart. He makes even more questionable coaching decisions on the sidelines. But the Mad Hatter said something today at SEC Football Media Days that makes a whole lot of sense. Mark Rogers TV on SEC scheduling. It's not fair. Les Miles knows it. Everybody that looks at the schedules and adds up numbers should be able to figure it out. And I'm sure that if Les Miles was on the other side of the argument, he probably wouldn't say a word. So he is laying out his gripe, but his gripe makes sense. Okay, as you know, this is the way scheduling works in SEC football. You've got 14 teams in the league. You've got 7 in the Eastern Division, 7 in the Western Division. Everybody plays everybody in its own division. That means 6 out of 8 games. So there's 2 games left over to play the other division. Okay, everybody in the SEC is assigned a natural rival. And in some cases, kind of like interleague in Major League Baseball, some of them make sense and some of them are just to fill out the schedule. So Alabama, Tennessee, natural rivalry. Auburn, Georgia, natural rivalry, and also LSU and Florida. But then the SEC pretty much just has to fill every spot out beyond that. Ole Miss is assigned to Vanderbilt. You've got Mississippi State and Kentucky. Lucking out are the Bulldogs there. You also have Arkansas and South Carolina. And then, of course, Texas A&M joined the SEC a couple years ago, and they take on Missouri, who joined at the same time from the Big 12. So they have a natural rivalry coming from the Big 12, so that makes sense as well. But what it causes is only one other game to be played amongst the other 5 teams that there are options for in the SEC. So you come up with very unequal scheduling. Let's check it out from last season. So, of course, Georgia, Florida, and South Carolina were the best teams vying for the Eastern Division Championship. Florida took on LSU and Arkansas, a 6-2 team, a 2-6 team, so that's 8-8 against LSU and Arkansas. South Carolina, as it were, actually played the same 2 teams, LSU and Arkansas in the other division, so comparing South Carolina and Florida made a whole lot of sense because they played the 2 teams exactly the same out of the other division. Okay, this is where it doesn't add up. Georgia, who ended up winning the division by defeating Florida head-to-head, which is, of course, fair, took on Ole Miss 3-5 and Auburn 0-8. So the 2 teams they took on, the Georgia Bulldogs from the SEC Western Division, were 3-13. Okay, it's even worse looking at Alabama and LSU this season, and this is what Les Miles is talking about. The Crimson Tide will take on Kentucky and Tennessee, the 2 worst teams in the SEC from last season. Tennessee, their natural rival, went 1-7. Kentucky went 0-8. The best team in college football from last season, the Alabama Crimson Tide, will be taking on 2 teams in the SEC who went 1-15. LSU, on the other hand, is taking on Georgia and Florida. Florida, its natural rival, and also Georgia because of the round-robin system. Both of those teams went 7-1 in conference last season. So LSU's 2 extra games, follow me here, outside of its division, Georgia, Florida, 14-2. Alabama, 1-15. That is completely not fair. So how do we fix this? Well, Steve Spurrier said something the other day that makes a whole lot of sense. Only count the games within the division because then you are matching and comparing apples to apples. Games against only division foes, and then, of course, the other games count just like they would non-conference games. And if there's a tiebreaker, then you would count the non-division games. Or you could do it this way. Let's balance out the scheduling and let's do it the way the NFL does it, but to this degree, it's much more simplified. So Alabama, for example, takes on Tennessee, their natural rival, 1-7. So to balance out that game, Alabama's going to take on a 7-1 team from last season. So either Florida or Georgia. Alabama's going to have to play one of them. LSU, natural rival, is Florida at 7-1. So they take on Tennessee, who was 1-7. And you go on down the list, and you've got Texas A&M taking on Missouri, natural rival at 2-6. But then they've got to take on Vanderbilt, a 5-3 team. Mississippi State gets the pleasure of playing Kentucky each season. The Wildcats at 0-8 last season, so Mississippi State's got to take on the best team in the division from last season, Georgia, the champ, at 7-1. For Ole Miss, it's Vanderbilt, natural rival, at 5-3. They have to take on South Carolina at 6-2. Arkansas's natural rival and assignment is South Carolina, a 6-2 team. We match up Arkansas and Missouri at a 2-6 football team from last season. And finally, Auburn has to take on Georgia, its natural rival at 7-1, so they take on the last place team, Kentucky, at 0-8. This is much more fair. It creates matchups that are balanced as much as possible. You can never completely balance the schedule, especially when you're assigning based on record from the previous season, because some teams get better and some teams get worse. But generally, we know who the powers are in the SEC, and it generally stays the same. For example, this year, in addition to the Alabama-LSU disparity, you also have Texas A&M not taking on Georgia or Florida. So LSU has to play both of them. Its two toughest competitors projected to be for this season in 2013 is, of course, Texas A&M and Alabama, and neither one of them play Georgia or Florida. Food for thought, and probably should make sense and be implemented, unless we go again with the Spurrier deal of playing and only counting those games in division unless there's a tiebreaker to be decided. Would love to hear what you have to say on the SEC scheduling dilemma right here on Mark Rogers TV.